So I'm taking a course this semester with a professor named Jacob Sherman, who did his PhD work at Cambridge in religion and philosophy. And the course is on Christianity and ecology. And we're doing mostly Christian readings. That is, we're reading um, Christian apologists of various sorts who are trying to both point out some criticisms of the Christian tradition that have perhaps been responsible for the ecological crisis, but they're also trying to draw upon the wisdom of the Christian tradition in order to rectify the situation. And I've just watched a video by ProfessorAnton. Um, I've engaged with Corey quite a bit in the past, and he was basically speaking about a lecture he just gave. He didn't. I think he meant to say that he was giving a lecture at a Catholic university. It wasn't exactly clear, but I assume that's the case. And he was asking his largely Christian audience if they would be willing to forgive God if they discovered that there is in fact no afterlife. And Corey got in a lengthy, seems like mostly an argument, maybe perhaps a bit of discussion as well, after this lecture with a man who was calling Corey to task as a sinner, and basically saying that, the really difficult part of Christianity is accepting that you yourself are responsible, that you are the one who needs to be forgiven, not God. This, sort of deflects us away from the question of the afterlife. I don't know what else Corey and this gentleman discussed, but it puts puts our attention squarely on this issue of original sin. Um, some theologians have drawn out of the biblical tradition this notion of original sin. I think other biblical scholars and theologians have drawn out another theme, which is original blessing. God saw his creation and said that it was good. So somehow that nature which has fallen, be it human nature or the universe itself, and in Paul, I think we see that there is and in John also, Gospel of John, we see that there's a connection between the human being and the creation. The fallen, the fallenness of human nature is at the same time the fallenness of nature. But this focus on original blessing rather than original sin, which has just as deep which is just as deep a strain in the history of Christian thought as the notion of original sin. Original creation, or original grace, and the notion of a good creation points us to the fact that, in fact, we are not simply sinners, that the Christian story is more complex than that. There are really three falls in the Christian story. There's not just the fall of man from nature. Before that, there's the fall of Lucifer or Satan from heaven. As Corey said, Satan is disguised as the serpent, which for ancient cultures was a symbol of wisdom. So first Satan falls from heaven, and then man falls from nature. And then Christ falls from heaven to redeem nature from the fallenness of man and the fallenness of Satan. And I think, we have to factor these all in when we're trying to give an account of this Christian mythos, this Christian religion or religious vision. Because in the New Testament it's very, very clearly expressed that we are all children of God, that Christ is not the only begotten Son, or rather, at least that Jesus is not the only begotten Son. Christ may be the only Son of God, but there is a Christ in each of us. We are all little Christs, you could say. There's a Christian mythos, which is sort of the popular story that we tell to carry forward the tradition and the rituals that we practice, to embed the tradition in our very bodies and daily lives. But there's also Christian science, there's theology, natural theology as well, which, certainly in our day and age, they have these sciences of the divine have fallen out of favor. We do anthropology today, but even that isn't taken as seriously often as, physics, natural science. But I think theology is still important, because even if we are atheists, we are still trying to solve, or even perhaps dissolve, theological questions about God, about, the metaphysical Father, perhaps metaphysiological Father. Who is our Creator? And I think even if we deny that such a thing exists, or such a person exists, we are still calling upon the theological resources of our imagination. Even an atheist is doing theology, even if it is a theology. And one of the things that theology in the Christian contexts, indeed there are many Christian philosophies and theologies, but what I think should be key to all of them in their diversity, one thing they must all share in order to be properly Christian, is this notion of incarnation, that the Word has become flesh. And, in between, or as part and parcel of this process of the Word transforming into flesh, and flesh transforming into Word, is a death rebirth mystery. Jesus had to die on the cross before he could be resurrected. And in some sense, each of us must die to our ego, that aspect of ourselves which takes very, very seriously the life of arms and legs and space and time, the physical world of our finite embodiment. We must die to that ego, that small self, and be reborn as a son of or daughter of God. That's the Christian calling. That's the difficulty. The crucifixion of one's own ego is the difficulty of Christianity. And in some sense, what this man was shouting about, I imagine, is exactly what Corey was saying, that he could not so much that he couldn't forgive God, but that he couldn't forgive himself. But in the way in which I would like to talk about theology, it is also both anthropology and psychology, meaning when we're doing theology, when we're atoning to God, trying to be at one with the divine, we're trying to reconcile ourselves as individuals and our species in general. We're trying to raise our particularity to the level of some universality. And in order to do so, the ego must die. And see, the ego is not responsible. The ego is a puppet. It's a sort of wake which emerges behind our body-bound actions. That is, our actions which arise out of bodily lusts and sensations and desires. The ego is not in control of any of what I do as an animal. The ego is sort of trailing along behind that which is acting and feeling guilty about or proud of whatever it was that my will was doing. Now, the will is more than the ego. I'm trying to give a sort of anatomy of the soul here. And the soul has both conscious and unconscious elements. And when the ego thinks it's in charge, a whole bunch of the soul is unconscious. And part of the Christian transformational injunction, part of what is asked of a Christian, is to transform their soul such that the ego, through a sort of crucifixion, a sort of burning up of one's own sense of separateness for the sake of a deep love of one's neighbor and of the world, through that to discover the deeper self, the little Christ within each of us. And that is where the will rests. The Christ in us, the love that is our soul. The soul doesn't love unless you're talking about a sort of lust or desire that the ego, as a we say conscious part of a soul, but really the ego is the most unconscious focus of attention that our soul is in possession of, or can be possessed by, depending on how you look at it. We have to allow a deeper part of our soul to flower before we are actually willing anything. And as I was saying, the soul is love. The soul does not have love as one of its capacities. It is love at its deepest level, a sort of agape, a self-transcending love. Because really, the soul is continuous, the individual soul is continuous with the soul of the world. And the Christ is really cosmic in extent and in intent. The Christ saves not only the human from sin, but all of nature, all of the cosmos. Or at least that's my Christian mythos and my Christian theology. And there certainly still exists within me personally a tension between, my Greek philosophical intellect and my Hebrew heart and soul. But somehow, I struggle to bring them together, to bring faith and reason into a mutually enhancing relationship with one another, to integrate them. That's really the Christian difficulty as well. There are many difficulties then these difficulties span the entire range of human uh, religious response to life and death. As far as the afterlife goes, the real meaning of the afterlife is that which comes after the death of the ego in this life. That's where heaven, uh, the kingdom of heaven, is found. And hell is the struggle to transform the ego. It's all here and now. While we exist on this earth today among one another, that's where the Christian mythos is meant to play itself out, not after this body decays into the soil to be born again by the light of the sun into plant life, which will then feed the animals and return again to the cycle, perhaps becoming conscious. Parts of me will become alive in the consciousness of a new being years after I am dead. Years after at least my body is dead. And I think perhaps the most difficult thing, not of Christianity within the Christian tradition, but for the Christian tradition to integrate, is reincarnation, which is what I'm trying to hint at here. But that's a story for another video. Thanks for listening.